Suddenly the machine shut off. It stopped exercising his limbs and other muscles. Desh looked around the gigantic room. Then he looked at the other soldiers. They were all unstrapping themselves from the machines. Desh looked at his arms. They were muscular, but not to the point of outrageous bulging. He tugged experimentally at his restraints. They came apart easily. He finished unstrapping his arms and legs and stood up. He teetered on legs that he hadn't used since he was a toddler. It took him a few seconds to orient himself, then he took his first steps. After he gained his balance, he followed the rest of the soldiers out of the door on the far side of the room. Dash emerged into a room that was a little bit smaller than the recovery room. In it were long racks of weapons and body armor. He heard a voice in his ear, probably projected from speakers hidden in the walls. Please select your weapon that was assigned to you, along with the appropriate uniform and body armor. Desh's pre-selected weapon was a 7.28 mm assault rifle with devastating high explosive rounds. Each bullet would detonate upon penetrating its target, blasting shrapnel and tearing internal organs. Then he selected his sidearm. He chose a standard 357 HE. His uniform came next. This was truly a technological wonder. The entire suit was jet black, fit like a glove, had internal temperature control, and was woven out of 100% carbon nanofiber. Without the actual body armor, this suit's ribbed chest area could stop a 9mm bullet in its tracks. No part of the suit would ever tear, so it could be worn time and again. The body armor itself was put on like a standard flak vest. This too was pure woven carbon nanofiber. The chest armor could stop a 50 caliber round without harm to the wearer. It could stop a 120mm tank shell, but the force of the impact would kill the soldier instantly. Arm and leg armor was also available, but not as strong, because if it were any thicker it would impede movement. Along with the armor came a jet black full-face helmet, the faceplate in the shape of a fat T that tapered down towards the bottom. He took it from its shelf and tucked it under his arm, then lifted the body armor from its rack and donned it. Desh followed the rest of the soldiers to the next room, all the while looking for a means of escape. The room he was in was filled with lines of cocoon-like pods, cryopods. Looks like they mean for us to lie dormant until they need us, Desh thought. So much for escaping. He watched as each one of his fellow soldiers climbed into the cryopods, then moved to his own. He was about to climb in and resign himself to servitude when a klaxon sounded and a voice spoke. All available units, report to the transport room. Repeat, all available units, report to the transport room for immediate deployment. Chapter 7. Desh again followed his contingent to the transport room. It was a cavernous hangar bay, filled with Sparrowhawk VTOLs. Each transport was 25 feet long. It consisted of a teardrop-shaped body with a cockpit at the thin end. Mounted on the top of the body was two wings, ending in sonic pulse thrusters. These engines could reach Mach 3 when mounted on fighter jets, but on the Sparrowhawks, they could only reach Mach 1. The transports had a maximum carrying capacity of 50 soldiers, plus the pilot and co-pilot. Desh climbed in and sat down near the front of the transport. He watched the other soldiers file in and take a seat. They were all putting on their helmets, so Desh followed suit. The helmet fit like it was made for him. There was a few seconds of blackness, then his HUD came to life. He saw his health monitors, pulse rate, blood pressure, physical trauma detectors. He also saw a list of his squad mates and their health status. There were 5 other drones in his squad. B82357-4 was the squad leader. Her ID tag hovered over her head when he looked at her. Prepare for takeoff, the pilot said over the radio. The sonic pulse thruster engines of the Sparrowhawk made a deep thrumming noise as they started up. Desh heard a loud grinding that sounded like concrete on metal. Desh leaned out of the transport and looked up to see the ceiling part and opened up to the sky. Desh saw clouds and an airplane passing by. He looked around the hangar and saw the Sparrowhawks lifting off one by one and rising into the sky. He felt his transport leave the ground and rose toward the sky. As the transport came up to the surface, Desh looked around the Earth for the first time. Green grass, white buildings, beautiful. The Sparrowhawk rose into the air, and just as the hatch closed, Desh caught a glimpse of the Washington Monument and the gaping, perfectly rectangular hole in the ground at the base of it. Chapter 8. Silence throughout the transport craft. No one spoke aloud. Only the occasional click as drones inserted rounds into spare magazines and sights were adjusted on sniper scopes with minuscule tools. The transport ship's pod had 2 levels, 25 drones on each level. Over his closed-circuit radio in his helmet, Desh heard the mission briefing and intel. Deployment will be in London, England, the north side of town, a female voice said as a map of London popped up on his HUD. It rotated steadily and highlighted key points and where his contingent would be deployed. Enemy forces reported to be medium, consisting mostly of sabotage, infiltration, and demolition teams. They are backed up by approximately 300 Reapers, armed with heavy assault weaponry. Intel reports that they are headed to the nuclear weapons manufacturing plant located beneath a local theater. Your primary targets are the Reapers and the demolition teams. Try to spare as many civilians as possible. Chances are that Reapers will take advantage of taking hostages using human shields. While the briefing was running, Desh was checking his supply pack, making sure he had everything he would need. Spare magazines, sterilizing biofoam, battle dressings, energy bars, battle stimulants, tetanus injections, surgical scalpel, tweezers and gauze, emergency rations, spare scopes, duct tape. Someone in the supply department had a sense of humor. Thermal packs, battle knife, water, more water, and a translation computer in case the auto translator in his helmet broke down. There was also an emergency transmitter and radio in case the ones in his helmet broke. In addition, there was a gun cleaning kit and stick-on patches of carbon nanofiber in case his uniform needed extra reinforcement. Finally, there was a water purification kit, just in case. He strapped the battle knife to his thigh. Ready. The pilot spoke over the radio. Prepare for a hot drop. Repeat, the landing zone is hot. Expect heavy resistance upon deployment. Time already? It's only been... Desh checked his mission clock on the far right corner of his HUD. 1 hour. Time flies, he thought. Desh felt the VTOL touch the ground. Then he heard the steady whine of minigun fire and the metallic pinging as the 50 caliber rounds hit the bay doors. The doors slowly slid apart, and drones began piling out, firing as they went. Brains and gore splattered the far side of the transport as multiple minigun rounds found their marks on 3 drones' heads. Desh jumped out and immediately dropped into a prone position. Bullets whizzed over his head and struck multiple drones. They staggered, but immediately steadied themselves and pushed on as if nothing had hit them. The carbon nanofiber was doing its work. Desh observed his surroundings. They had landed in a rotary, with cars upturned, burning, or riddled with bullet holes. Their drivers were either dead, dying, staring dumbstruck, fleeing in panic, or captured and used as human shields by the enemy. There was a statue of a man on a horse in the center of the rotary. Then he saw the Reapers, walking tanks, huge 6'9" on average men, with huge bulging muscles and an enormous upper body, powerful legs, heavily armed and armored. The one that caught his eye was the one wearing a camo carbon nanofiber tank top and padded legs and shins, also nanofiber. He had no arm armor and no helmet. He instead had a small screen in front of his eye mounted on a boom that attached to his ear. He carried a portable minigun which was spitting out spent cartridges as fast as the eye could follow. He carried the belt of ammo in a huge backpack on his back. He had a maniacal grin that hinted overconfidence. Desh watched as he took a burst of high explosive rounds in the left shoulder. Gore sprayed as his collarbone muscles and scapula were shredded. He showed a moment of pain, then dropped to one knee. One of the drones ran up to him, kicked him in the chest, knocking him back, then shoved the barrel of a shotgun into the man's mouth and blew his head apart. When the incoming fire slacked off, Desh stood up. He raised his assault rifle, clicked off the safety, and looked for a route of escape. Suddenly, a Reaper popped up from behind an overturned car and opened fire with a minigun. The bullets hit him like a sledgehammer in the chest. Dash planted his feet and took careful aim, all the while being hit with 50 caliber bullets. He sighted down his rifle and squeezed off one shot. His aim was true, or he was lucky, because he was rewarded with the sight of the Reaper's head exploding as the HE rounds hit. The soldier fell to his knees and fell forward, hitting what was left of his head on the hood of the car that he was hiding behind. Dash tasted blood. The vest had stopped the bullets from penetrating his body, but the impact could be just as deadly. A bruised heart could lead to death. Dash checked his biomonitors. Elevated pulse rate, and the injury sensors registered 2 cracked ribs. The reinforced chest area of his uniform would keep the ribs set, so no problem there. Escape. That was his first priority. The VTOLs had taken off and left them, so going back was always an option. Except for the fact that while he was checking his vitals, a Reaper had managed to sneak up behind him and was waiting for him to turn around. Of course, Dash had heard him breathing 6 feet away, so he waited for him to make the first move. "Hey, runt!" Dash turned slowly while stealthily drawing the battle knife from the sheath on his thigh. Dash finished turning around and saw the Reaper standing a yard away from him. The giant of a man looked down at him and smirked. Dash slowly looked up at him. "Ready to die, runt?" the Reaper said. Dash looked at the man's face for 3 seconds longer and then said, You?" The man had just enough time to register surprise as Dash delivered a devastating backhand slash with a knife to the Reaper's throat. Blood splattered his visor as the man's own heart pumped the blood from his body. Dash dropped the bloody knife and took off his helmet. He carefully wiped it off, then removed a panel in the back. Inside were multiple computer chips and wires. He removed the transmitter that would broadcast his position to his allies. He also reached into his pack and removed the emergency transmitter radio. He placed it onto the ground and drew his sidearm. He put the entire clip into the transmitter. He was now officially dead. No one would track him. No one would find him. He dropped his weapons and ran. Dash removed his body armor in the privacy of a dressing room in a clothing store. He kept his uniform, as it would fit under any clothing he chose to wear. Plus, he needed the rib support of the chest in order to keep his ribs in place while they healed. Dash received a lot of stares when he walked in. Most of them were stares of fear and shock. Dash found out why when he looked in the mirror at his face. He was unnaturally pale, with eyes sunken deeply into his sockets. His flesh was pulled so tight against his skull that he could see the outlines of his teeth and cheekbones. There was barely any flesh in his lips. When he closed his mouth, his lips made only a thin line across his face. No wonder people are scared, he thought. I need clothes and something to cover my face. Dash wandered around the store looking for appropriate clothes. He picked out gray, baggy coveralls and tight black leather gloves to cover his ghostly pale hands. He had to discard his army-issued gloves because they didn't cover his fingers, and because he got blood all over them. He then went to the sports section of the store and chose a white full-face hockey mask and put it on. Confident he would not draw attention, he exited the store, unaware that he had just stolen from it. Dash was halfway down the block when the store owner came running after him. "Hey, your iris scan said you don't have an account to charge that shit to. Give it back." The owner grabbed Dash's shoulder, and immediately the clone reached behind and grabbed the unfortunate man's hand, spun around, twisted, and dislocated his shoulder. The owner lay on the ground screaming in pain. Dash looked at him for a moment, then turned and walked on. Chapter 9. Earlier that day, Valentine Brooks sat in her home, eating breakfast. She was watching TV that was displaying the news. A news correspondent was reporting a Martian carrier in low orbit. It was violating a number of FAA rules and regulations and refused to answer hails. The carrier, the correspondent said, reported to be the RFS Vengeance, is in low atmosphere orbit over London, England. That caught Valentine's attention. The carrier is holding its orbit and, wait, what's it launching? Zoom in on one of those. The camera zoomed in on a cluster of strange black dots that the carrier was spitting out of its underside. They were, in fact, drop pods. Teardrop-shaped pods that typically contain 4 soldiers in their equipment. "Oh my god, they're invading! We're being attacked! Those fucking Martians! They're sending soldiers!" The correspondent had lost all composure and was in a state of panic. "They're dropping soldiers right in London!" Valentine watched in horror as the first drop pods hit Earth, throwing dust and debris everywhere. The majority of them landed in the tungsten rotary. Then she heard a high whistling, getting louder and lower by the second. Discarding her breakfast, she grabbed her coat and ran outside. Valentine knew what the whistling meant. She'd seen enough war movies to suspect that something deadly was falling towards her. She looked up into the sky and when she got a safe distance from her house, a large black object was screaming through the sky directly toward her house. It was then that she remembered that her father was still asleep with his girlfriend upstairs. She knew she couldn't save them in time, but she ran towards the house nonetheless. The whistling grew louder, then quickly dropped in pitch as the drop pod impacted with the two-story, middle-class suburban house. Valentine was lifted off her feet and dashed against a dumpster 5 yards behind her. Sharp pain in the back of her head ended abruptly as she lost consciousness.